Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on building real relationships. I'm Bianca Durrani, President and CEO of Aperio Philanthropy, co-host of the webinar with our friends at New York University School of Professional Studies. A little bit about us. Aperio is a fundraising consulting firm that works with nonprofits to grow their revenue sustainably and dynamically. We have a vision for a world in which everyone can thrive, and we believe that nonprofits are really central to achieving that vision and creating change. Day to day, we work alongside community leaders and fundraisers to develop simpler, faster, and smarter ways to generate revenue for their missions. Our client services provide strategic advisory, hands-on support, and embedded fundraisers to organizations nationwide. As a firm created to drive change, we have been thrilled to host a series of webinars with NYU over the past few years. We've been facilitating conversations with thought leaders about the role of philanthropy and fundraising in driving change and solving complex societal problems. Today is our first webinar in a new series that is focused on a question that is top of mind for all of us as nonprofit leaders, fundraisers, business leaders, philanthropists, which is this question of resiliency in an uncertain world with lots of change. How do we make our organizations really resilient and specifically financially resilient? We are starting today with a topic at the heart of it all, which is relationships. How do we build real ones? And how do we ensure that our fundraising programs can continue through change? With that micro introduction, I'll pass it over to our co-host, Michelle D'Amico.
Great. Thank you, Bianca. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle D'Amico, and I'm the Director of Continuing Education and Public Programs at the NYU SPS Center for Global Affairs, or CGA. Since its founding, our goal at the CGA has been to prepare global citizens to make a positive impact in the world. We do this through a variety of activities, including our 2 graduate programs, an MS in Global Affairs and another MS in Global Security, Conflict, and Cybercrime. We also offer a wide variety of skills and knowledge-based continuing education courses and offer public events such as this that expand upon the critical topics covered in our classroom. We are also very proud to be home to the George H. Hayman Jr. Program for Fundraising and Philanthropy. Through our open enrollment courses, on-site intensives, and certificate in fundraising, we offer professionally oriented educational opportunities for those looking to enter or grow within the fundraising field. Courses are taught by practitioner faculty who bring their vast expertise, experience, and networks to the classroom, including the moderator of today's conversation, Cheryl Gentry, who I'm delighted to introduce. Cheryl Gentry is the founder and CEO of Glow Global Events. She was named in 2019 and 2018 Top People in Events by BizBash, listed in the 2017 Top Influential Women in Meetings, and in 2017 was a Brava Award winner Top Female CEO by Smart CEO magazine. In addition to being a leader in the $40 billion event industry, Cheryl, that's amazing. Cheryl was a strategic entrepreneur constantly seeking out innovative opportunities. Gentry led Glow to be ranked number 145 on the 2020 Inc. 500, a measure of America's fastest growing businesses. And throughout 2020, a time when many companies struggled to stay afloat, Glow Global Events doubled down on virtual events and capitalized upon that opportunity. We are delighted and honored to have Cheryl as a part of the faculty team here, where she leads a course on strategies for impactful virtual and in-person events. And now, without further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Cheryl for today's discussion.
Thank you so much, Bianca. Thank you, Michelle. I am so excited to be here today to really talk about this panel. About 60% of our clients are nonprofit organizations, so this really is key to me to listen to what this dynamic panel has to say. And in an uncertain world, we need more nonprofits than ever. But uncertainty affects nonprofits too, complicating everything from strategic planning to service delivery. For fundraisers, the demands are high, raising funds today and delivering growth for tomorrow. A broad and diverse engaged coalition of donors can fuel a mission year over year, even through crisis or uncertainty. But donor loyalty doesn't happen automatically, and we all know that. Today's conversation will explore, and please take notes because we have a dynamic panel with us. We'll explore what does it take to build real relationships with donors, what inspires donor loyalty and ongoing investment, And how can lean teams expand their reach? To begin, it is my pleasure to introduce this distinguished plant panel. First, we have Kristine Templin. If you could turn your camera on, Kristine. She has more than 20 years of industry experience and currently serves as Chief Development Officer with Meals on Wheels America. She oversees the national fundraising strategy for corporate partnerships, major donors, and special events while working collaboratively with Meals on Wheels member programs. Second, joining us today is Sara Lipsky. She has more than 25 years of industry experience and currently serves as the Vice President of Philanthropy at Shatterproof. Sara is a relationship builder and healthcare advocate with an ability to create and implement strategic revenue generating programs, resulting in a broad impact. Next, we have Kate Landon. Kate has more than 25 years of industry experience and currently serves as the Vice President of Philanthropy. I'm sorry, Kate Landon, wrong bio. Sorry, Kate. Kate Landon currently serves as Executive Director for the Ban Ki-moon Foundation, founded and chaired by 8th UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. Previously, she served as Vice President of Programs and Institutional Advancement at the New York Women's Foundation, where she oversaw local and national grant making and fundraising initiatives totaling $10 million annually. And then finally joining our amazing panel is Janet Kingsbury Warren. She is Senior Managing Director of Dartmouth College Fund, where she works with high-performing teams of fundraising colleagues and volunteers to raise $50 million annually. She joined Dartmouth 9 years ago after serving the more than 35 years working for the American Red Cross, Student Conservation Association, and the National Park Service. As you can see, we have a distinguished but very seasoned, experienced group of panelists today. And I'd like to really jump into the discussion. Welcome, ladies. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to jump right in and set the stage. And this question's for all of you, but to get us started, let's have each of you share a little bit about your lens on the conversation we'll be having today. Tell us how your organization leverages relationships and fundraising. And if you could start it off, Kristine, that would be great.
Yeah, I'm happy to. And thank you for having me, Cheryl and Michelle and Bianca as well, and hosting this panel. So I'm excited for the conversation and I'm honored to be kind of on this panel with my colleagues at different organizations. So I will say that for Meals on Wheels America, we're actually very much in a test and learn phase when thinking about leveraging relationships and supportive fundraising. So even though we're an organization that is 50 years old, having a formal annual giving or major gifts program is actually relatively new for us. And so what we're really trying to do right now is better understand what kind of relationship our donors want to have with us, and then what kind of relationship can we offer them. And so I think for me, just in my experience, the worst thing that we could do is really set an unrealistic expectation around the kind of relationship or even just relationship continuum that we can build for our donors. And so we are really, as I said, in this test and learn and just really implementing some best practices around just surveying our donors, having conversations with them, documenting, even just looking at open rates of what they're opening and not opening. So I'm actually excited to learn from my colleagues today as well about some of the techniques that they have.
Sara, what about you? How is your organization leveraging relationships and fundraising?
Yeah, thanks. So similar to Kristine, we are in sort of our, I think, infant stages in an advancement program. So I specifically focus on major gifts and institutional giving, although my history has been with way beyond that. So it's interesting to be able to build a program. And so we're in that same very much like test and grow stage and figuring it out a little bit as we go. I love the expression building the plane while flying it. That's exactly where we're at. And because we do systems change work, it's a little bit different in how to best engage with our donors. So that's been an interesting journey as well to discover.
Thank you, Sara. Kate, how's your organization leveraging relationships and fundraising?
Sure. So as you mentioned in the bio, I'm currently executive director of the Ban Ki-moon Foundation. And Ban Ki-moon, if you're familiar with the goings on at the United Nations, he was the 8th Secretary General of the United Nations after Kofi Annan, and prior to the current Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. And it was under his leadership that 2 key frameworks were passed. The Sustainable Development Goals, as well as the Paris Climate Agreement. And so as you can imagine, as we have launched the foundation under his name and legacy, here in the US, we think about relationships really as key to everything we do, in that we want to develop relationships with donors who come from his network, right? Who want to now partner with us in this new stage of his career in launching a foundation, because they have worked with him in the past and they want to help us continue his legacy and honor his leadership on those key issues of importance. But also with new donors, new younger generations who perhaps have never partnered with the UN, have never worked with him directly, but still remain very much inspired by the work he's done, and want to be able to continue that leadership in their own way, in new ways, on these same issues. And so we think a lot about relationship building, particularly across generations, and what it means to also pass the torch in relationship building. So I'll pause there and leave it at that for more later.
Thank you. I love that. I love that as well. And Janet, what about you? I mean, I attended Tuck at Dartmouth, and so I know a lot about how Tuck is leveraging relationships and fundraising, but why don't you tell us what you're doing at Dartmouth?
Yeah, really Tuck's at the top of the heap, right, as far as graduate schools go. So I think, all the organizations I've worked with have been around for at least 100 years and have been fundraising for at least that long. And one of the things that really resonates with me and our teams is, and I'm sure you've all heard, that people give to people, but there are a lot of people and a lot of meaningful causes to give to. So what I like to think about and have our teams think about is think about the people in your own life who listen to you, who are sincere, who inspire you, people that you trust and respect and you're proud to associate with. And as leaders in our organizations, if we aspire to be respected and trusted and inspirational ambassadors for our community of volunteers and donors, our fundraising efforts will be successful. It's all about being able to connect a potential donor with something that feels real and right and meaningful. So that's kind of our philosophy.
Very good. Thank you so much. My next question is for Sara and Kristine. We use the word relationships a lot in fundraising today. So if you could help us unpack what we really mean. What does it mean for an organization to have a relationship with a single donor or with a whole donor community?
Yeah, so I'll start. So I think this really means, like, the biggest word that comes to mind when I think about relationships is trust. Your organization is trusted to have a significant impact. Your organization is a resource for that donor. They are comfortable referring people, whether that's for a donation or for an actual resource the organization is providing, or just guidance in general. Yeah, actually, I think it's that simple. I'm going to stop there.
Yeah, Kristine, same question.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Sara. And I think, when you think about relationships, it's no different than a relationship you have with a friend or any other relationship that you have. It's about considering their feelings, their perspectives, their motivations, their timeline. I think as fundraisers, we often, we've been trained to think about moves management, right? Like, we've got a process and we're moving them through, and it's all about getting to an ask. And I think when you think about relationships, you have to take yourself out of that process, because the donor's not thinking about a moves management process. Oh, I'm in this cultivation stage, and then they're going to move me to a solicitation stage. That's not how they're thinking about it. So I think it's really paying attention to how they individually, but also collectively are responding to your invitation to be a part of their of our cause, of our movement. And so I just want to echo what Janet was saying too, is that it is about building trust. And I think that that trust comes from exactly what Sara was just saying, is that you're a trusted resource, that you're providing them with credible information, you're providing them with authenticity, you're providing them with stories that are going to motivate them. So I think, again, it's taking ourselves a little bit out of what we've been trained as a fundraiser and kind of through this cycle. And it's really, again, it's just about how you would want to be treated in any kind of relationship as well.
Yeah, thank you, Kristine. Trust really does matter, especially in this donor engagement and philanthropy. Kate, it's easy to see why relationships are beneficial to donors. We learn about their interests, we uncover new opportunities, and we improve their experience with the organization. What's the flip side? Why is it important for organizations themselves? What is the connection to our topic of resiliency?
Great question. I also think about this in terms of my experience as a grant maker, as starting off as a program officer at the New York Women's Foundation, and then moving on to oversee all of our grant making and managing a program officer. So I've been on both sides of this relationship in various ways. And I think hands down, as was said, in that at the end of the day, donors are investing in people, right? They're investing in the individuals in the community that are being, served or improved or engaged or mobilized in some capacity by the work of the organization. They're investing in the frontline staff doing that work. They're investing in the executive management team. They're investing in the CEO or president, in the leadership of the board. Using that sort of framework, it's clear to see, and it's also very apparent in budgets, right, that the number one asset that nonprofits have at the end of the day are the people, is the talent across the board. And because none of us exist in a vacuum, then I think it's very easy to back into realizing that if we want to keep that talent, grow that talent, and see that talent thrive, we have to be thinking about not just the individual, but that ecosystem, right, of relationships in which they exist, and really pay attention to that. And I do think the best nonprofit leaders spend a lot of their time paying attention to, listening to, and improving the relationships of people across the organization, from the participant in the community, the volunteer, the staff, all the way up to board relationships, because it is those relationships time and time again that I also saw as a grant maker when nonprofits would come to us in these times of trouble. It's those relationships that sustain and get organizations and teams through hard times. So that's always a lens I think that I bring to thinking about this work.
Thank you. And you talked about sustaining these relationships. And we all know that in times of crisis, we talk about donor loyalty. And during recessions, we hope donors will support us through tough times. During the pandemic, we hope donors would continue giving to our missions. And even though physical events and programs were paused, Kristine, can you just tell us a little bit of how did you build this kind of loyalty amongst your donors? And what should we be focusing on when the sky is blue?
Yeah, I think, this goes back to, again, what kind of relationship do you want to have with your donors? And then you start to build that bond from the moment they make that first gift, right? And so I think, Janet and I both have come from a background of working at the American Red Cross, where episodic disasters happened every day. Some of them made mainstream media, and that's usually what motivated people to give. But oftentimes disasters were happening that didn't make, kind of that mainstream media. And even though it seemed like it was blue sky, it wasn't. House fires, were a huge issue, still are a huge issue for that organization. if you think about, Meals on Wheels America, we only serve 2.2 million seniors, but there are 10 million seniors that don't know where their next meal is going to come from. And so we all feel like we're living in a crisis every single day, not just when, it kind of makes it to mainstream media. So I think that, just kind of coming from my Red Cross days, and again, thinking about the kind of relationship you want to build, I think when you are honest and transparent and authentic with your donors, they're going to reward you with their loyalty. And so that means when you make a mistake, you own it. When there is a crisis, they hear about it from you first. When there's a significant milestone, they hear about it from you first. And so again, this kind of goes back to just building a very trusted relationship where they feel part of the family, they feel part of the movement, they feel that their contribution is, making a real difference, whether it's during a crisis or not during a crisis. And so I think, again, it's all about kind of going back to what Janet said, it's trust and building a very authentic relationship. I think we sometimes, we don't give our donors enough credit, and that, they are humans as well, and they make mistakes and they don't always get everything right. And so I think that when we treat them as if, just regular people and have an open and honest conversation with them, like I said, I do think that they will reward you with their loyalty.
Yeah, thank you, Kristine. And that's a good segue for Janet, really talking about cultivation. How do you approach developing a relationship with an individual donor?
Yeah, this is definitely my sweet spot and why I love being a fundraiser. And what I thought I'd do is just give a couple of examples of people that I've worked with and, that have delivered. So one story is about helping someone build on a family legacy. And I'm sure many of you remember the fires that ravaged Yellowstone National Park during the summer of '88. And as a former park ranger, I know how devastated I felt. And everyone who'd visited Yellowstone wanted to find a way to help. At the time, I worked with the Student Conservation Association, and as development director, I worked closely with the board members. And one board member was Theodore Roosevelt IV. I'm sure you know who his great-grandfather was. And his great-grandfather had a huge impact by doubling the number of national parks. And what I did was I knew that was a passion for Ted. So I worked closely with him to develop a call to action. And he wrote a heartfelt direct mail appeal. I worked with him probably, I don't know how many hours on that, inviting people in the United States to join in the recovery efforts. And with that, we tripled our donor base. We recruited thousands of volunteers to assist in the recovery efforts. And so there's an example of meaningful engagement for him, for all the donors, and for the people that gave their time for the Yellowstone Recovery Corps. And, I still have that relationship today with Ted. Another example is about my work currently at Dartmouth College. And we have a proud tradition of alumni giving, very generous giving. And we've been especially successful at unleashing the power of women's philanthropy. I'm sure you all know the saying, ask for money and get advice, ask for advice and get money. Well, we had a group of women who conceived the idea of raising $25 million from other alumni to renovate the most iconic building on campus. And so we let the alumni lead. We listened, we understood the lead donors' motivations for giving. We built meaningful stewardship into the project. And one of the lead donors said, if 1,000 alumni give at least $1, I will give 5 million. And one of the most meaningful moments in my career was when we opened the doors for the first time on the 50th anniversary celebration weekend of coeducation at Dartmouth. And hundreds of women walked through the doors and saw their names engraved on the wall at the front entry. We had 2,500 donors, and whether they gave $5 or $5 million, they were all listed in alphabetical order. a symbol of the collective impact of every woman, not just a few. We didn't change the name of the building. We didn't have donor names above the doors of the rooms. Each donor was given the same recognition in the same sized font. And we honored the intention of the lead donors who wanted an inclusive effort, which would be a powerful tribute to every woman who gave. So there's just two examples of working with donors to achieve something that was super meaningful to them.
I love both of those examples, Janet, and I'm going to have to call you and implement something like that at my alma mater at Howard University. I absolutely love that. Thank you. And so with those both examples, how does your approach differ from loyal annual donors versus a newer or prospect donor?
It is all about listening and learning what resonates with your donors so you can find meaningful connections. And again, when I was at the Red Cross, one of the things we did, which was really fun, is we started a memory book. And we sent our loyal donors and volunteers a one-pager asking them to share their favorite Red Cross memory or connection. And then we put them all into a book. So we called everyone who returned the sheet. And as a result, many donor visits were set up. We learned such rich stories. We connected, military members connecting with Red Cross nurses, people whose first job was a lifeguard, people who had their child's life saved by a blood donation. And one of the things we learned is that pretty much everybody that we talked to has at least one meaningful connection to the American Red Cross. We just had to have them think about it. And with new donors, I think being very intentional, having you or a volunteer call them to thank them, ask a few questions, what inspired them to give. And I think about 9/11 a lot when we recruited dozens of people just in our own area who are long-term Red Cross volunteers. And many of them have become our most generous longtime donors. So being intentional with new donors, making sure they feel gratitude and that they see a place where they can fit in and make a difference.
Thank you, Janet. Yeah, I know a lot of new donors are cultivated through events. And so, Sara, when you look at a common challenge for organizations that actually host events, is that donors attend, they donate, but then they never engage or give again. How can events be used as a launching point and a launching pad for lasting relationships?
So I'll start with one word again, and that's intention, I think, and having a good plan going into an event. I know there's so much always going on and planning up to the event and all the details that happen, but above all else, I always try to figure out, okay, what's going to actually happen in the event that we're able to connect with either the current donors or prospective donors, and how do we target it? So really taking a hard look at the attendee list and doing some research where you can see red flags on, right? Like, this is someone we may want to look at. So, if you have staff working on it, certainly talking with staff, and just doing a little bit of deep dive. And I would even recommend actually creating meetings for this purpose. And then, just I'm getting very weedy right now, but it's worked really well, is assigning who's going to be doing those touch points. Is it a board member? And really, I've done cheat sheets for board members and sent it to them in advance. These are the 3 people I need you to go talk to. I'll help you identify, or the staff will help you identify, right, on who they are. And these are the things that I need you to engage about, right? And just keep it really simple, especially for volunteers and board members who are doing that work. It was and I would always go back to them sharing their why above all else. I don't want them repeating our work. It's always hard for them. They get nervous doing that. So going back to just what is their personal connection to the mission and sharing that with whoever it is. But I would say just being very strategic about using that event as good time for engagement, for cultivation, for building a relationship, building that trust, right? Making sure that you have those touch points.
Absolutely. We see that at a lot of events that we host as well, having that board member. And like you said, it's all about a strategy. You really have to have your strategy in place. Kate, like any relationship, a relationship with a donor can hit snags. How do you navigate such challenges?
Well, I think one thing I always talk to fundraisers or staff of nonprofits in general about is to not wait until those rainy days or those challenging moments to happen to have a plan. I think even in the best of times, right? You're meeting all of your fundraising goals, all of the programs are going according to plan. You should be setting aside time to do that scenario planning, to project out and to say, okay, things are going well now according to all these factors, but how might things change in the future? You know, what are the upcoming trends in our political, social, economic landscape that we should be planning for? So I encourage organizations to always make time for that. I know as elections here in the US have been tumultuous in past years, there have been elections that have where the outcomes have surprised people and thrown nonprofits for a loop, realizing they didn't necessarily have messaging ready or donor shifts in donor engagement strategies ready when donors started calling and saying, oh, now this has happened, what are you going to do about it, right? And having to literally take time off to figure out what their response to donors was going to be. So don't be afraid to plan ahead for all scenarios is one thing I would say. When you asked that question about hitting a snag, I also was brought back immediately to my first job in the nonprofit sector as a young executive director of an organization that did development work in Nicaragua. And I sat in the office in Connecticut, and I oversaw a team of staff doing the work in rural high poverty areas of Nicaragua, and getting a call from a donor because he had heard through the grapevine that one of the projects that he had invested in the year before, a community garden, had to be dismantled because it wasn't going well for a variety of reasons, and being upset, essentially feeling like he had been promised that it was going to be an amazing success, and you know all of these other things had happened. Weather events had come in and destroyed some of the infrastructure. Wild animals had come through and taken some of taken some of the food itself. And so I inherited a relationship that I then had to course correct. And I learned very quickly that, you know, the best tools you can have in your toolbox is to be honest, figure out how to name those uncomfortable things and say things like, you know, I totally see the vision that you had when you made that gift. And, you know, and we appreciated that so much because it was a risky thing to invest in. And it's too few of our donors want to take risks like that with us. But it is these risks that always, and taking, you know, some sort of the uncharted route, those are the things that really enable us to move our work forward. And we so honor and value for that. Why don't we think about taking that energy and repurposing it into a different, an evolved partnership between us? And that's how we were able to save that relationship and figure out what was the essence behind what he wanted to do. And we kept that relationship alive, luckily, and was able to keep his university, because it was really coming from a university partner, engaged, actually in a much more deep and meaningful way, because we were able to turn that gift into a less of an output of a garden that they wanted to see visually into more of a embedded training and leadership development program for the community members, so that the entire community felt responsible, right, for that garden, and not just the staff of the organization. So I think that goes back to what was mentioned before about when you know, having that trust ready to build upon when those, you know, inevitable moments, those difficult moments come, you know, really make all the difference.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm learning so much from this. I hope you guys are all taking notes and keep hearing these buzzwords: honest, intentional, strategic, trust. These are a lot of things that you have to have and consider when you're building your donor base. But when we think about institutional donors, Kristine, I'd love to find out, Meals on Wheels specializes in strong corporate partnerships. How do you approach relationship building in this work?
Yeah, so this is my sweet spot. So when it comes to corporate, my philosophy is I'd rather do more with less. I'd rather build really deep, comprehensive, sustaining partnerships and versus these transactional ones that kind of come and go. There's certainly space for those, and they're important for sure. But I think, we all, companies in particular, have so many assets beyond just kind of the monetary assets that they can bring to a nonprofit organization. And so we work really hard to basically understand not only what are the social objectives and the impact that the company is trying to have, but what are their business objectives? I often say, like, this is not philanthropy, this is not fundraising. This is really about building a partnership where there are mutual goals and objectives. And so you might be talking to a company that is looking for a halo effect, right? Like, they need to elevate and amplify their brand. They need to retain their employees. They want to acquire new customers. They're looking to launch a new product, and they think an alignment with your organization, your brand, your mission will help them do that. And so I think it's having a really, kind of asking a lot of questions, doing a lot of research around what assets do they bring to the table that you can think about. So for example, I'll just say we partner with the Home Depot Foundation. So a lot of seniors, live in homes where there are fall factors, for example. So falls actually cost this country $50 billion a year. And so there's simple modifications that you can make in a home so that a senior is less likely to fall. And so the Home Depot will partner with us on those either minor or even major modifications. But through conversation, we realize that they actually have sustainability goals as well around the environment. Well, what better way to save seniors money than to make sure that their home is sustainable? So would the Home Depot Foundation put in new windows for these seniors? Would they look, again, kind of do an assessment and see some other, their plumbing? Are they dripping water? Their heating? Do they need a new, HVAC system? And so we were able to kind of, one, do some home improvements that allow the senior to stay in their home, but two, meet the goals and objectives of the Home Depot Foundation through sustainability, which who would have thought Meals on Wheels America would do that? And then some really powerful storytelling that kind of comes out of that. And so I think that risk, Kate brought this up, when you're both willing to take a little bit of risk and say, we've never done this before, but let's try it. Let's see if it works. I think that, again, you'll build deeper and better relationships with our partners. I will also say too, just two things, is that I have our relationship managers build what we call strategic account business plans for all of our partners that bring in $100,000 or more. And these are really comprehensive plans, and I'm happy to share the template with everybody, but it really makes the relationship manager take a step back and think about where are the opportunities for growth and what's the pathway to get there. And so, because it does take time. And then I would also just recommend for those hiring managers out there is oftentimes with corporate, I don't hire traditional fundraisers. So I think bringing in someone that has a marketing background or somebody that's coming from the corporate side that has that business acumen, that can speak the business lingo, really, it goes a long way. And they just bring a different perspective to the table as well, which is always helpful.
Thank you, Kristine. And then sticking with and staying with the institutional donor side, we know foundations can often feel like the least accessible audience, or one that we assume doesn't require relationships. Since there are applications processed, Kate, can you talk about how do you approach relationship building in your partnerships with foundations and grant makers?
Well, one thing I share a lot, and I both with colleagues doing this work, but also through our own work at the Ban Ki-moon Foundation, because we do a lot of technical assistance and capacity building for emerging leaders, doing work aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, who are desperately trying to figure out, right, how to break into the world of foundations and make their work and get access to that world. Is that one, just not to feel bad per se if you're feeling daunted and having to create relationships with foundations, because unfortunately it's it's somewhat by design, right? The gatekeeping that's built into the industry, in part because if every foundation had an open call for proposals, they would just be deluged with submissions, inquiries, emails, phone calls, et cetera. So, and having been on that side of the table, I understand that, but yet I'm also a big champion for democratizing the field, making foundation funding more accessible, making building transparency into how funding decisions are made, increasing payouts of foundations overall, being a champion for that. But this is one of my favorite topics of conversation. One thing I always recommend to people is realize, one, if you are lucky to get a conversation or a relationship started with a program officer, who's typically the person who acts as the frontline, relationship manager, is to start to think about the relationship on two levels. One, with the person, the program officer, for example, who is in charge of that portfolio from which you may get a grant, but also with the institution itself, and a lot of the organization to organization. I think a lot of the same principles that work with individual donors work with program officers as well, seeing them as a person, understanding what they're bringing to the table, both personal and professional, in a conversation, first and foremost, and showing an interest in that, showing an interest in how they got to their role, showing an interest in what their journey at that foundation has been like, allowing them even sometimes to vent and talk about their own challenges and designing a strategy, figuring out how to deploy the resources, asking them what their biggest successes have been, what have their challenges been, show them that you care about them and their professional role overall there, and aren't just there to, ask for money, which is what they get all of the time. I think the phrase that was heard before about asking for advice, and you may get money, ask for money, you're going to get advice from the program officer, certainly, definitely very much applies in these cases. I think you want to first and foremost position yourself as a colleague to that program officer, as a thought leader, as a credible colleague and partner potentially in the field, regardless of whether that relationship turns into a funding one between their institution and your institution, because they will be more likely to think of you when new opportunities arise. Offer yourself to say, if you have other grantees who ever want to talk shop, talk field issues, let them know I'm here. If I were funded, oh, you have this cohort and that, these events that you do, we would love to be a part of that. And then oftentimes those program officers don't stick around for forever, right? They do go on to other places. And so if you've maintained that relationship and invested in that relationship, oftentimes that program officer will remember you when they land at their next institution, right? And it might be able to fast track a relationship. But at the same time, I think you want to find a way to make sure that if they leave, you still have relationships with other staff or ideally the leadership in some level of the foundation, so that you can maintain, right, that funding relationship. So I primarily like to think about it, on those two levels, institutional and at the personal level.
Thank you. Yeah, Kate and Kristine, thank you. You gave us a really great perspective on institutional donors. But now I'd like to questions for Sara and Janet about lean teams. We know building relationships and inspiring donor loyalty can be especially challenging for lean teams with many responsibilities and priorities. Sara, what advice would you have for small shops? And then we'll move on to Janet with that same question.
Sure. So first thing I would say is just make sure you're prioritizing. And I used to work with someone, a fellow fundraiser, and he would repeat this phrase all the time. So I constantly remind myself, it stuck with me for many years, for all these years. But it was, do the things that drive revenue first, right? And that that has been my mantra, is this going to produce revenue in a significant way? Okay, and how much? And so I think it's easy to get distracted by shiny objects. And so I think being laser focused on what are the priorities for this year and not letting other things creep into that. So having the ability to say no and then or not right now. Great idea, would love to do that. Our priorities this year are X, Y, and Z. And I would also, to that end, make sure clarifying goals and expectations, and along those lines, setting reasonable goals too, as well, is really, really important, so that you're not setting yourself up for failure, right? You can't tackle it all. So where am I going to spend my time? What is reasonable to set as an expectation in this realm, if it's new work or just growth of work? I think it's going to be really important, especially in the small shops when you can't do it all. You want to, but you can't.
Thank you. And we do realize lean teams actually raise big. And so, Janet, same question for you. What advice would you have for small shops?
Well, as you said, you can't do it alone. So what I try to do is to clone myself as many times over as I can. And so I focus, when I was working for smaller nonprofits, on training our board members and other volunteers to serve as ambassadors in the community, and worked with them on developing their personal story, and then empowered them to speak at Rotary, Kiwanis, community events, to write letters to the editor, to post on social media, to make thank you videos or write thank you letters. I would say, you know, we always want to keep our reason for being top of mind, and to make sure that those are closest to the organization feel the connection and the impact of their work. So another example is to start each staff or volunteer meeting or training with an inspirational client story, or pass around a meaningful letter you received. To also find creative ways to show gratitude for everyone who volunteers or donates. Again, all the good feelings that are out there will resonate in dollars coming in. So one thing I particularly like to do is to take pictures and videos, and it gives me an opportunity to capture special moments. And then I use those when I follow up with people. And, you know, it might be an immediate follow-up, or it might be like at Dartmouth, you know, I get to meet parents and their students when they enter for the first time together on move-in day, and then at commencement. So a lot of times for my donors that I work with, you know, I can send them 4 years of pictures at commencement and show, you know, that trajectory for their student. Those are the kind of things that are meaningful. You know, I think visuals, the more visual we can be and the more in person we can be. And in the smaller nonprofits, it really isn't about doing it yourself. It's really about bringing others to the table and getting them to assist.
Absolutely. Thank you, Janet. You guys all had such great answers. Like I said, I'm learning a lot. We do have a couple of questions that popped up in the chat. If you have questions, you all, now we're going to jump into our Q&A section. So please feel free to populate in the chat there on the side. But the first question is, and any of the panelists can answer this, what trends do you see in fundraising and granting dollars moving towards currently? Is there a specific work or particular communities that people, foundations, or corporations seem eager to fund at this time? Does anyone see anything particular?
I'll start off if that's, I think from our perspective, we certainly are seeing more interest in underserved or unserved communities, and looking at rural populations in particular, more marginalized populations. But I will also say, you know, and it kind of got me thinking a little bit what Kate was saying too, is that we're seeing a lot more trust-based philanthropy. And I think that, you know, I'm very blessed in that I work for an organization that has a very well-known brand, and I think that that goes a long way. But I think, so I would say trust-based philanthropy is something that we're also seeing, where there's just less requirements, less restrictions, more flexibility in how the funds are being spent, especially if you're more transparent in kind of what your programmatic priorities are. And then the last trend that I'm seeing too is really investing in collaborations. And so, like, how can nonprofits work together to solve a problem, whether it's a systemic problem, whether it's truly kind of more around economies of scale or efficiencies. But I think that collaboration is also a trend that I'm seeing.
Yeah, and you mentioned your collaboration with Home Depot, so that's actually an excellent insight there for us too. I'll jump to the next question. Have any of you used or thought about using generative AI as a tool for fundraising? If yes, what have you learned? If not, what are your thoughts as generative AI as a tool?
All
Well,
right, I'll go.
oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Sarah.
No, I'll just do true confessions. Like ChatGPT is my best friend. And really I use that a lot of times as like if I'm stuck or a starting point, I don't really let it dictate because I think it's important that you're making it your own voice or the voice of the organization. So I think that's really important. But I think it's a great tool to just kind of jumpstart you. So that's been my experience so far with just AI.
Yeah, I agree. Jumpstart. And the other tool I use is to always check subject lines on emails. And there's subject line raters that you want to get people to click through your message. So that's just a simple thing you can do before you send something out, and make sure you have 100% rating on your subject line. So I think there are uses for it, but it doesn't replace the one-to-one. It doesn't replace the personal touch that we all can bring.
I'm learning so many nuggets from you all today. I didn't know there was a subject line rater. I'm going to have to look into that. I love that. Our next question, do any of you have any tips on identifying, cultivating, soliciting, and stewarding a targeted portfolio of annual fund prospects?
Well, that's what I do every day. We have all of our alumni are our prospects, which is easier than a lot of other organizations. I think of the Red Cross, where everyone in the United States is basically a prospect. But for Dartmouth, it's pretty much, the 78,000 people that have graduated over the years. So yeah, I'd be glad to talk offline with anybody about looking at a database and really figuring out what segmentation might make sense. And then I think to somebody, oh, Sara, I think you talked about prioritizing, that's important. And matching up people for cultivation and solicitation based on a variety of factors, because again, you can't do it all alone. So I'd be glad to talk to anybody offline about really thinking through who your audience is, who your current donors are, and how you can really utilize segmentation and messaging most effectively.
Thank you, Janet. Moving to the next question, I know we've all watched the news, and since COVID, it's been reported that there are more and more billionaires. However, there seems to be a lot of buzz lately around the decrease in individual philanthropy year over year. Have you seen this in any of your respective organizations, and what have you done to mitigate this?
I can jump in here. So it's interesting. I've been through a lot of these times of fluctuations, that ebbs and flows with donor preferences and the buzz out there, and Katrina and the economy. Honestly, I try to ignore it, right? Like I try to be like, yes, it's a factor, but I don't use it as, the excuse too, right? I've seen a lot of organizations do that. And I think the more you do that, the more you feed into it. So I think it's okay, acknowledge that is a challenge, but frankly, like we saw year over year growth. We're also in a growing stage. But I think if you say laser focus, I don't think that I think it can be a little bit too noisy sometimes. I've seen organizations let it be noisy. And so even if that's all true, I would just caution the use of that as, getting in your way. It's just, and it is what it is. You can't do anything about the, some of that fluctuation, but you do the best you can with what you have, utilizing a lot of the tools that we talked about today.
I would just add on to that and agree in that, back to the point I made before about scenario planning, and that, there are these cycles of events in the landscape that we all are impacted by. that do happen over and over again. And yes, they may change in flavor and how they, affect specifics. But I would say, yes, invest in that forward thinking and that forward planning. The other thing I would say to speak truth to our sector is a lot of this concern around, decrease in individual donors. Nonprofits, we need to be looking at how our own staffing, patterns. If individual gift officers are not there over the long run also internally to maintain those relationships, of course, then when things happen in the field, we're going to feel that more acutely, right? So I also want to, flag that when we were talking about relationships and how, frontline fundraisers build relationships with the donors, my mind always goes to, well, what are the relationships between the frontline fundraisers and the finance staff and the program staff, right? And the upper management and the talent management practices of the organization to keep good fundraisers in-house and to keep them with strong, healthy relationships with the rest of their team, because that is what will lead them to being successful on the front lines. I've had many conversations with fundraisers over the years that would say, I know I could raise more money if, right, my relationships, my terms, my this was better in-house. And that's what's preventing me. That's the biggest barrier. It's not the donor necessarily, themselves. So I would want to flag that as part of this conversation as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kate. And we're just going to wrap it up now, but I do have a question for each of you. In a sentence or two, what is the biggest takeaway you want us to leave with?
I know mine, so I could just go first. It's what I said before. It's do the things that drive revenue first, right? Prioritize above all else. So easy for me.
I think for me, it's, you can't boil the ocean. So and it can seem overwhelming at times. And so start small. I think, as Sara said, like if you're only going to choose one thing, what is that one thing that could have a ripple effect across many different things? But don't try to do everything. Just focus on like one thing.
And what I think about is really knowing or having all of you think about how you find meaning in your work. What's really meaningful to you, and find ways to inspire others to join you in that work. And one of the things I think about is what somebody told me when I was a young fundraiser. There are no donors in the office. Get away from your desk. Get out in the community, and that will be inspiring to you as it is to the people that you meet.
And Kate.
Yeah, I would say, I think at the end of the day, you want your donors to find a true philanthropic home in your organization, right? That it not be a transactional relationship, that there are ways that they can bring their full selves to your mission and your work. And that includes not just them and their checkbook, but that includes their employer relationship, their alma mater, right? Whether no matter what university they go to, it means their families, their children, their friends. So I think if you focus on building that ecosystem of relationships, not just with the person, but the entities around them, you will see that those relationships will remain through hard times, because it will be harder for that donor to pull away since they have so much already invested in you, and they know that there are these other relationships, right, that are sustaining them in their relationship with you as well. That would be my final takeaway.
Well, thank you all so much. One thing for sure, I am going to be downloading and saving this webinar and listening to it again. We're putting something in the chat now regarding the recording and also upcoming events that you can attend. Kate, Janet, Sara, and Kristine, thank you so much for participating today.